So I went around, asked people to give me random words. So I put those random words to you to just create a story around it, right? Which is a creative process. So tell us what those words are and maybe share the story.
Sure. The words are gold, 13, weekend, random, and tornado. I didn't write so much of a story as I ended up writing a news piece, a very dark one. Time constraints. So I wrote, once known for gold mining, this California town was struck with a random tornado last weekend. The disasters destroyed over a dozen homes and left 13 people injured.
Yay. All right. Okay, we've got a story there. You just created a news piece, right?
I did.
Okay, wonderful. What about the next one?
It's another news piece in other news.
And the words?
The words are autumn, letter, shark, sports, and balloon. And I wrote, many in Emerald Isle, North Carolina are looking forward to the upcoming festival celebrating the start of autumn. Festivities will include a parade of local sports teams as well as an array of colorful balloons. This comes as exciting news just weeks after a tragic shark accident along our coast weeks ago. The mayor will honor the tragic loss of teenager and footballer Connor Smith and his family by reading a loving letter he wrote to his parents just weeks before his passing.
Whoa.
A very positive mindset.
The tragedy is coming across. You see the story. We just basically you created, Nadia, some touching, moving, inspiring, tragic stories here out of 5 random words that we picked just in passing just a moment ago. Okay, so creativity in full flow. Now, to you. Mimi, what did you
So
create
mine
for
are
us?
also rather tragic.
Okay. Read the words again. So
set 1 was gold, 13, weekend, random, and tornado. So mine was, it was the 13th of June when the tornado hit. It was always the 13th of June. The weatherman said it was random, but Julia Gold knew better. For some reason, their little town was hit this time every year. Julia was convinced that this was actually their town's own version of the lottery, where one family was sacrificed to save the town from other tornadoes. She sincerely hoped that their house was once again spared this weekend.
Okay, you got the weekend in there.
Yeah, I did.
Great. Okay. Set 2?
Set 2 was autumn, letter, shark, sports, and balloon. Once again, tragic. Blake had been surfing off the beach of Chatham, Massachusetts when the lifeguard yelled out, "Shark sighting," but Blake was too far to hear. The shark appeared out of nowhere and took a bite out of Blake's board. Blake fell into the water. Blake's board and his foot. Blake fell into the water and lost consciousness, waking up in the hospital room surrounded by get well balloons and letters. Blake looked down at his repaired foot, realizing he would probably never surf or play sports again. As summer turned to autumn, Blake came to terms with his new reality, forcing himself to find happiness.
Whoa, okay. What do you think?
I liked yours better.
I like to write a lot.
Okay, wonderful. So in the end, what we're doing here is we're sort of getting an understanding of the creative process. You created something in a very short amount of time, right? 5 words given to you, randomly selected. Okay. How did that feel? How did that go for you, the whole process?
I mean, mine was a stream of consciousness. I just sat down, saw those words, and wrote the first thing that came to my mind that fit those words. For me, it was relatively easy. Definitely through high school and college, when I was stressed, I wrote things down, whether it was a story or just journaling. I've always written things down. I find it a better way to process things. So to do this was definitely within my wheelhouse of how I view myself as creative.
So no pushing out of the comfort zone there?
No, it's pretty standard.
Okay, great. What about you?
There was a lot of pushing out of the comfort zone. So I also consider myself a writer. That's always been my trade, sort of, when it comes to the creativity wheelhouse. But I guess working under these constraints was very difficult. And for me, what this is like much more of a news format, which is not something I typically write in. And I think it was more so because I saw certain words and those constraints made me feel like I had to make it about an event. And so I was kind of writing and then hoping that it would all come together, and it was much more like transactional. Like I still have to find a way to insert letter. Okay, like let me follow that up and hope this comes together in a narrative. But it was very unnatural, and I guess this is like a cool way to think about writing, because when I do write, I write more stream of consciousness, but using these words like completely threw me off and reoriented the process.
So if I asked you to just write whatever you want to, do you feel that's comfortable, that's helpful to you?
Yeah.
To you, right?
I mean, you had me do that.
Yeah, so what was that like?
I mean, it was fine. It has no sort of format yet. I don't even know where it's going.
Okay.
But this girl is sitting on her porch.
Okay, good. What about you?
I think if you asked me to write about anything, I could have a million ideas. So if you didn't give us these constraints and you said, go ahead and write like a 1-paragraph story, I could easily come up with, something to write with, because I'm constantly thinking of different sort of vignettes anyway, and I could call upon one of those, but it was because it was an entirely new setting with all these random words that threw me off.
Okay.
I definitely think in terms of stories. Like I'm always daydreaming. I'm the person that like wakes up from a dream is like, I should write that down.
Yeah.
Interesting. And we are narrative animals, right? We think in stories in many ways, and whatever the story is, it might not be a good one, but it is something that we need to tell each other, to tell ourselves also, to make sense of the world. Now, in terms of creativity, what I want to point out, though, is you were able to create something in a very short amount of time, right? And the typical way that people think about creativity is that, okay, it is sort of more like a divine inspiration that's coming to you at a, whatever, indeterminate kind of time point. And there may be that, right? In the context of organizations, oftentimes it's not like that. In fact, we are the most creative when we have constraints. So when people typically say, okay, I don't like those constraints, I don't like the words, etc., it's actually forcing you to create something much more so than it would open-ended kind of creation process. You can do anything you want. Because we benefit from constraint. Necessity is the mother of invention, right?
Right.
So our brain responds to constraints, time constraint, the words, etc. You would not have created something that quickly without that constraint, right?
Yes.
And then oftentimes what happens is we push it off, we don't do much. So in terms of organizing and creativity, there is this counterintuitive sense that actually time constraints are good. And any other type of constraint is actually helpful, if you see it that way. If you see it as limiting, you will not be creative. You will block yourself. You will have all kinds of mental stories about it, like, this is not the way I want, this is not how I function, this is not how this and this goes, we don't have enough time, etc., etc. In fact, it's quite the opposite. If you're pushing yourself out there, what happens is that your prefrontal cortex, who constantly evaluates yourself, will shut down. And then the creativity can flow. I noticed you were erasing a lot.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. And I think, just to add to your point about constraints, I say that it's easy for me to write, and if you asked me to write a story, could I come up with an idea? I have 1,000 ideas for stories, but if you said, can you write it right now? Absolutely not. I would have spent an hour thinking about, like, what do I want the outline of this story to be? And then I would have changed my mind. The way that I erase a lot, I would have done that for the whole thing. And ultimately, I probably would be here all afternoon. So I also see the benefit of constraints. And it forces you to think differently. Like, you're not going your typical, your go-to route. You're working under these constraints, so that gives you like a finite idea of what to write, and then you have to come up with that right away.
And you will notice from many writers and musicians and composers that are considered creative, they actually force themselves into a constrained routine. They will say, every morning I get up and I write half an hour or 2 minutes or something like that, or I'll compose something. It just has to be there, and I force myself into it. Because otherwise, that moment, that burst of creativity almost never comes, right? And it's quite extraordinary to think about it that way, because that does allow any kind of organization, like a business, to be creative, quite with a routine about creativity. So if you wanted to think broader than that, you can see, all right, you know what? Any kind of organization could use this kind of creative juice that we have in us by putting certain problem-solving exercises in front of us. And people love it, right? You were mentioning the times when you were engaged at work. That was when you were given control over solving a problem without a specific sort of routine and outcome there. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is. I enjoy problem solving, and I think that's also rewarding.
Right.
And I definitely experienced like paralysis analysis. And then when you don't have those constraints, you literally take forever. So as much as I want to be like, oh, I'm a writer, I'm not unless someone is literally standing over my shoulder and saying, write this now. We need this by tonight.
Right.
And then that's when I finally do it.
Exactly. So those deadlines that people have, deadlines, right? They are actually lifelines in many ways. Without those constraints, we oftentimes wouldn't function, right? And if we see that way, then actually I think we can ascribe some positivity to that and sort of embrace it. And I think many organizations are afraid of constraints. They think the creative process requires openness and all kinds of resources. And my students oftentimes say, well, if I had a lot of money, I would be able to create this and this and this. In fact, the most creativity comes from when you don't have any resources.
Right.
When you have those constraints. When you're forced to think about what can you do with very little. And oftentimes you come up with a lot better solutions than if you had a lot of money. So that's where the entrepreneurs come in, right? That's where managers can actually come in and say, okay, we don't have much, and we're going to try to figure out how we can solve this problem. This does correspond to the drive to comprehend, and it ignites us. It does make us feel alive, right? How did you feel about writing this?
I mean, I had a great time.
Great time, okay.
I just like writing, so for me, I was like, okay, well, I didn't know what to expect when you said writing. I was like, are we going to be writing like a non-fiction, like essay? I was not ready to do that, but creative writing is definitely my calming place.
Okay, cool. What about you?
At first, I was just really like uncomfortable with it, and then when I was like, you know what, this probably isn't gonna be that great anyway, I kind of like was able to wrap it up in the end in a way that looked nice. So if you notice, I was erasing a lot in the beginning, and then by the end, I'm not really erasing anymore. Like especially the first one, and that was also very liberating. So it kind of mirrored that.
And your prefrontal cortex was constantly evaluating, right?
Right.
Because I was witnessing her writing, and she was erasing a lot. She was erasing a lot and constantly sort of saying, potentially internally, like, this is not good enough.
Right.
This is not good enough, right? Until I said, no more erasing,
Yeah.
no more erasing, and 30 seconds.
Right.
That's when most of those words came on the page. So those constraints, even though we don't think, or you may not think like that, they helped you.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely, they did.
Yeah.
I would still be writing.
Right, exactly. All right, so that's, I think, the main point of this exercise, to understand how we can look at constraints as something positive and enabling creativity. And those constraints are around us all the time. So really, we don't lack constraints. And once we see them differently as enabling creativity, I think we can work a lot with them. Okay?